One day before the highly anticipated summit between South Korea's new President Yoon Suk-yeol and his U.S. counterpart, President Joe Biden. The American leader arrives in Seoul on Friday and is set to begin his three-day schedule by visiting a semiconductor plant and greeting allied troops. The world's 7 richest countries pledge an $18 billion plan to assist Ukraine in its efforts to push back Russia's ongoing invasion. This as the U.S. Senate passes a $40 billion package for military and humanitarian aid for the war-torn country. South Korea's intelligence agency says North Korea is looking for the perfect timing to conduct a nuclear test. Although the regime is grappling with the COVID-19 outbreak, Pyongyang looks to have finished preparations to launch another long-range missile.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Friday, May 20th, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea, and I'm Lee Seung-jae.
I'm Oh Soo-young. Thank you for joining us this morning. Over the next hour, we'll be giving you the biggest headlines of the day and experts' insights on some of the key issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. U.S. President Joe Biden lands in Seoul on Friday afternoon, kicking off his Northeast Asia trip.
That's right. In Seoul, the commander-in-chief will sit for talks with the new South Korean leader, likely key topics, economy and security. Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
U.S. President Joe Biden is due in Seoul late Friday afternoon for his very first meeting with South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said Mr. Biden's first trip to South Korea and the Indo-Pacific as president will serve as an opportunity to reaffirm and reinforce Washington's vital security alliance with Seoul and deepen their vibrant economic partnership. The U.S. president will begin his 3-day official visit here with a tour of the Samsung Electronics semiconductor plant in Pyeongtaek, where he may be joined by President Yoon, as both leaders place great emphasis on cooperation in economic security. Mr. Biden will also see South Korean and American troops standing shoulder to shoulder in defense of their collective security and consult on the challenges posed by North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. South Korea and the U.S. have been detecting signs of a North Korean nuclear test or a long-range missile test, or both, before, during, or after Biden's trip to South Korea and Japan.
We are preparing for all contingencies, and we are prepared, obviously, to make both short and longer-term adjustments to our military posture as necessary to ensure that we are providing both defense and deterrence to our allies in the region.
The 90-minute-long Yoon-Biden bilateral is slated for Saturday afternoon, which will be followed by a joint news conference and a state dinner hosted by the South Korean president. Contrary to earlier speculations that Mr. Biden may visit the DMZ and meet with former South Korean President Moon Jae-in, the White House denied the possibilities. On the eve of the U.S. leader's visit, Yoon's National Security Council convened its first weekly meeting and analyzed signs of North Korea's ballistic missile and nuclear test. President Yoon's National Security Advisor Kim Sung-han also held a virtual introductory meeting with his Japanese counterpart Takeo Akiba to discuss bilateral and trilateral security cooperation with the U.S. on regional and global issues. During the trip, President Biden will also likely focus on the need to improve ties between Seoul and Tokyo to strengthen trilateral cooperation with Washington, something on which President Yoon will likely share his own thoughts as well. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The US-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which South Korea is seeking to join, is not a tool to ostracize China, but a supply chain alliance essential to economic security. That's according to an official from the top office who pointed out that, in fact, the IPEF could boost South Korea's supply chain cooperation with China. Seoul's Trade Ministry also highlighted that joining the pact is in South Korea's national interests as it aims to become a country open to trade. As for concerns about Beijing opposing Seoul's participation, the ministry pointed out there are plans to take part in the China-led trade pact RCEP. The group of 7 nations has pledged over $18 billion of financial assistance to shore up the Ukrainian government's finances. Now this comes as the U.S. Senate overwhelmingly approved more aid for the war-torn country. Kim Yo-sun has more.
Finance ministers of the G7 agreed to provide $18.4 billion worth of financial assistance for Ukraine. In a draft communique released Thursday following their meeting, the U.S., Japan, Canada, Britain, Germany, France, and Italy vowed to stand by Ukraine throughout its war with Russia and do more if needed. Germany, which holds the G7 presidency this year, also announced a contribution of €1 billion or $1.1 billion for Ukraine.
To this end, we are currently collecting the various pledges for direct liquidity support. The United States of America has already pledged $7.5 trillion in direct support for Ukraine. I have just declared for Germany in the meeting that we want to participate in the order of €1 billion.
The news comes as the U.S. Senate passed a $40 billion military and humanitarian assistance package for the war-torn country. The bill, which passed in the House of Representatives earlier this month, now goes to President Joe Biden for his final signature. It provides funding for defense equipment, migration and refugee assistance, as well as emergency food aid. Against his backdrop, the U.S. chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff spoke with his Russian counterpart over the phone Thursday. The Pentagon confirmed that the military leaders discussed several security-related issues of concern, agreeing to keep the lines of communication open. The call comes a week after U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin held a phone call with his Russian counterpart. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
The nation's intel agency says North Korea is looking for the perfect timing to conduct a nuclear test. Even though the regime is in the middle of a health crisis, it's completed preparations to launch another long-range missile. Peunji reports.
During a closed-door briefing to lawmakers on Thursday, South Korea's National Intelligence Service said North Korea has completed preparations for a nuclear test, despite the regime's recent COVID-19 outbreak. Right after the briefing, Ha Tae-kyung, a senior member of the National Assembly's Intelligence Committee, told reporters that the outbreak in North Korea is expected to reach its peak in late May or early June, but warned there will still be provocations.
Even though North Korea is struggling from COVID-19, it is showing signs of a missile launch. It's completed its preparations for a nuclear test and is looking for the perfect timing.
This came a day after Kim Tae-hyo, the first deputy chief of the Presidential National Security Office, said that the possibility of North Korea conducting a nuclear test by this weekend is relatively low, but preparations for an ICBM launch are believed to be imminent. According to a military source, South Korea and the U.S. have reportedly detected the movement of vehicles that inject fuel into missiles. North Korea uses liquid fuel made up of hypertoxic materials, so once the fuel is injected, the missile needs to be fired within a few days. So it's likely that the North will carry out a major provocation during U.S. President Joe Biden's visit to Seoul this week. Peunji, Arirang News.
Now, it's been 8 days since North Korea first reported an outbreak of COVID-19, and the total number of people with symptoms of fever has now surpassed 2 million. Now, this is according to data counted since late April, released by the North state-run Korean Central News Agency on Friday. The total death toll now stands at 65. Pyongyang has been reporting more than 200,000 cases a day for 4 straight days, with Thursday's tally at over 260,000. South Korea's National Intelligence Service said that the North's report on daily COVID-19 cases appears to be a strategy to reassure its people by showing the regime's efforts to tame the virus. Now, the WHO said Thursday that it has granted emergency use authorization for a COVID-19 vaccine made by China's CanSino Biologics. The UN Health Agency said that the single-dose vaccine was found to be about 92% effective against severe COVID-19 and 64% effective in preventing people from getting symptoms of the virus. The vaccine is recommended for everyone aged 18 and above, and the vaccine is also the 11th vaccine overall and the 3rd Chinese vaccine to be approved by the WHO. Now, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency vowed on Thursday for a transparent review process to enhance public confidence ahead of the release of the treated water into the sea from the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Now, Director General Rafael Grossi, who's in Japan for a 3-day trip, inspected reactor decommissioning procedures and the storage of the treated water. Now, he stressed that everything is in full compliance with IAEA safety standards. The planned discharge of treated water is expected to begin around next spring.
It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. South Korea's new president, Yoon Suk-yeol, meets his U.S. counterpart, President Joe Biden, on Saturday. This being Yoon's first summit with another head of state. It marks the South Korean leader's foreign policy priority, Seoul's ironclad alliance with Washington. Their talks will cover the two allies' security ties against growing regional threats, namely a nuclear North Korea. But the discussions are also expected to cover value-based cooperation, including economic security, with South Korea expressing intent to join the US-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Today, we discuss what to expect on the highly anticipated Yoon-Biden summit. Joining us for this discussion is Bruce Bennett, policy analyst at RAND Corporation, and Kim Yeon-uk, professor and director general at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Very warm welcome to you both. And starting with you, Dr. Bennett, my first question to you. Well, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he said that he's expecting North Korea to launch a provocation before or during even President Biden's trip to Northeast Asia. Now, would you agree with this outlook? And in what form do you think a provocation might take place if it does?
Well, I think Kim Jong-un has been very disappointed that the United States is paying so much attention to Ukraine and to Russia and what's going on in that part of the world. He claims to be the leader of a near peer to the United States, but he's not getting into the news. And so that is a problem for him, since outside news leaks into North Korea. He wants to be part of in the news, and that means using some kind of provocation to get attention while President Biden is visiting with President Yoon. But what is he going to do? Well, that's in part his desire, his function of his desire, but it's also in part a function of what his people are prepared for. They may not be ready to do a nuclear test. They may not be ready to do another Hwasong 17 test. So it will be interesting to see what they do. It should tell us as much as anything what kind of capabilities they have ready for testing. And certainly testing is less than operationally ready.
And Professor Kim, South Korea's intelligence agency says that North Korea has completed preparations to launch another long-range missile. And while, of course, the Seoul and Washington defense chiefs, they said that they're going to keep up their readiness against any possible provocations. But what kind of scenarios do you think the allies are preparing for, and how would they respond to a provocation, especially if it happens during Mr. Biden's trip here?
Well, I think because the U.S. president visits to South Korea, and if North Korea pursues any kinds of military provocations, including ICBM tests, as you mentioned, during his visit to Asia, I think this is a very emergent situation for the United States security. And I think they will upgrade the level into the wartime situations and pretty much try to cope with these wartime situations along with the South Korean president in a designated spot in South Korea. Maybe that's first one. And secondly, I think some other extended deterrence measures which has been vacant for a while, something like deploying the strategic assets to the Korean Peninsula. I think it might be something that they can think of. Maybe later on, they will resume the military exercises, joint military exercises, but this is something that kept happened before. I mean, all these measures are, the problems of all these measures are that, post-affairs measures, post-affairs extended deterrence measures. So even though they talk about the readiness, I'm personally wondering if there are any efficient measures that really can prevent the North Korean provocations beforehand. I think that's the fundamental, problems of the extended deterrence situations in South Korea.
And Dr. Bennett, there has been talk about really strengthening extended deterrence for quite some time now, but how would Seoul and Washington pursue that, and how would they also strengthen their trilateral security ties with Tokyo as well?
Well, the key to deterrence is letting your opponent know before it does provocations or military actions, the punishment that it could suffer if it tries to do those things, and also your ability to prevent it from being able to successfully do those things. So a part of what the United States and South Korea need to be doing is talking more about our ability for prevention and punishment. Part of that prevention is associated with the three-axis systems, with the kill chain, with Korean air and missile defense and U.S. air and missile defense, and with the Korean massive punishment and retaliation system and the U.S. retaliation that would be possible. The U.S. and South Korea need to be far clearer with those about the conditions that could lead us to take such action. And we should not be allowing North Korea to launch an ICBM without some substantial punishment. Now, you might say, well, but what are you going to do? A military response? And I think the answer is no, that's not appropriate. But what would be appropriate is an information response. Remember that Kim Jong-un recently said that K-pop and Korean culture was a vicious cancer that could cause his regime to collapse like a damp wall. Okay, let's tell Kim, you do an ICBM test and you're going to find 1 million USB drives dumped all over Pyongyang with K-pop, with Korean dramas and so forth. And sure, you'll police up 95% of them, but enough will get to your leaders that you're going to be very unhappy. So we need to be coming up with unique kinds of approaches like that.
And indeed, the two leaders will have multiple agendas to discuss on their plate. And well, one of them, though, Professor Kim, is expected to be the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework that the US has been planning to launch for quite some time now. And we know that they're going to launch it next week during Mr. Biden's trip to Tokyo. And South Korea is set to formally announce its intention to join the framework. And well, what are you expecting to see from Mr. Yoon and Mr. Biden's talks? And what kind of details do you expect to come out from this?
The fundamentals of IPEF is that is from the Biden government's global supply chain policies. I mean, from the early part of last year, what Biden government did is to try to check the global supply chain situations of key industries of the United States. This is the core of U.S.-China policy now, and Biden became successful in mobilizing countries to form its own initiated global supply chain, excluding China out of it. And what is the United States doing now? Institutionalizing these policies, leading to so-called IPEF. So I think throughout the IPEF, the U.S. will be officially launch the global supply chain, make the membership official, and institutionalize these policies throughout the regional institution. So I think this will definitely need some official rule setting, which I don't think there was any official rules so far. President Biden, by individual state, requested and did some of the issues that is beneficial to the United States. For example, call Samsung leader to cut off its deal with China, things like that. But all these things and behaviors will be something made something as a rule, official rules. So I think IPEF is dealing with all these issues, and voila, the U.S. is finally, doing some second version, Indo-Pacific policy and strategy, I think.
And Professor Kim, well, we know that Beijing has been very wary about the two leaders meeting. And what kind of reaction do you expect to see from China as Seoul continues to commit to more and more US-led initiatives?
First thing to say is that Biden government's U.S.-China competition is becoming a zero-sum game, and allies and partners would not be allowed to be balanced between two countries anymore. I mean, we don't have to worry about Chinese, verbal criticism about the, allies and partners' behaviors leaning towards the United States, because that happens anywhere, anytime from China. China complains about any countries sticking to the U.S. side, and we don't have to worry about it. That's what China does all the time. But what we have to be really worried about is what is Chinese red line? If what kinds of behaviors of South Korea will bring China into another economic coercion on South Korea, which South Korea I don't think is ready yet. Maybe some military issues. If South Korea tries to deploy another THAAD into South Korea, that I think will bring the China into some other economic coercion. But IPEF, an economic partnership, that doesn't really matter. I mean, I don't think this will be such a big, problem for China to do something on South Korea.
And Dr. Bennett, well, China extended an invitation to the new South Korean president to visit Beijing. Now, do you see this as a move to keep the South Korea-Japan-US alliance in check? And do you see Beijing really stepping up pressure on Seoul as it continues moving towards the United States and perhaps engaging in more Quad initiatives?
Oh, absolutely. I think China is very anxious to put on some pressure. Now, how extreme it is, as we just heard, we don't know how far they're prepared to go. But remember, THAAD was not a really big deal, and yet they applied incredible pressure on South Korea. So now you have President Yoon as the president of South Korea. I think China will want to tell him what it is they want and put some real pressure on him. And that'll be good for President Yoon, because then he'll get a sense for where the Chinese are coming from. Remember that the Chinese want to, in about 25 years, have global domination. President Xi Jinping has announced that. And so this is a time where all countries outside of China need to be worrying about how we deal with Chinese efforts to dominate and to influence our countries.
Well, Professor Kim, now, how do you expect or hope to see South Korea and the United States jointly approach their North Korea agenda? I mean, not just in terms of pursuing denuclearization, but also tackling the spiraling COVID-19 situation there.
I think this is, big opportunity for South Korea to develop inter-Korea relations. Of course, this is such a bad casualty in North Korea. But the problem is, if North Korea really would like to accept all these humanitarian, assistance by the United States or by South Korea, maybe not. They will try to come up with, Chinese assistance and possibly some, assistance from, internet global institutions like COVAX. So we'll see how it goes. If they do not accept the offers directly from South Korea, this issue I don't think will be, addressed at the summit meeting. But I think if this situation is escalated in North Korea, maybe this will be, a big, burden for Kim Jong-un to do more and more hardline policies towards the United States and South Korea in the near future.
And Dr. Bennett, for decades, the US and South Korea were allies in security and, of course, economic partnership as well. But recently, Yoon and Biden have both emphasized shared values such as freedom, human rights, and liberal democracy. So how do you see them really incorporating that into their partnership as they continue to take on these shared regional security issues?
Well, I think it's important to start emphasizing for both President Yoon and President Biden the challenges of human rights in North Korea. That's an issue which we can both deal with. It fits on the information spectrum that I was talking about before. The lack of human rights, the abuse of the prison systems, the North Korean gulags that are for political prisoners. That kind of thing is a part of what the U.S. and South Korea ought to be talking about, trying to get North Korea to change. But we also have to be careful. If we go too far with the negative, North Korea is just going to brush us off. There has to be a balance between the negative kinds of things that we try to do to get North Korea to change, but also the positive. So offering North Korea some Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. They've indicated tremendous interest in those. That would be a positive. It is a carrot and stick approach of let's try and see if we can break through to North Korea and offer them things which will cause them to be more cooperative. That may fail, but at least it's an effort we should be trying together, our two countries, to see if we can change the way the North interacts with the world.
Well, I'm afraid our time is up, so this is where we'll have to leave the interview today. That was Bruce Bennett, Policy Analyst at RAND Corporation, and Kim Yeon-wook, Professor and Director General at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
That's going to wrap up the first half of New Day at Arirang.
That's right, but stick around. We have more coming your way in the second half, so we'll be back in just a moment.
Now, the global economy is expected to improve slightly this year. The level dropped, but
future economic indicators weren't so positive.
Faster growth in emerging
U.S.-China trade deal may be near, while a rally in global
For an economic outlook of South Korea's economy for 2020, we get a preview now from our business correspondent.
Arirang, what matters?
What made this all possible? LiDAR technology is being used to improve accuracy.
Now, South Korea's producer price index, a key barometer of future inflation, hit a record high in April, rising on month for the fourth month in a row.
The Bank of Korea says the producer price index in April came to 118.02, up 1.1% from a month earlier. Compared to the previous year, it's a jump of more than 9%, marking the 17th straight month that the prices have been higher higher year-on-year. The central bank says the rise is due to agricultural, livestock and fishery products, with prices of pork jumping by 28% and cooking oil rising by nearly 12%. Hikes in electricity, gas and water charges and industrial goods, particularly coal and petroleum products, also contributed to higher prices. Lawmakers are set to vote on whether to approve President Yoon's pick of Prime Minister. The National Assembly will hold a plenary session Friday 4 p.m. with the confirmation vote on Han Duck-soo largely depending on the main opposition Democratic Party, which has a 167-seat majority in the 300-seat parliament. Han has served as PM before during the Nominee administration and worked 40 years as a civil servant at various economic agencies. He's also served as ambassador to the United States. The Prime Minister's office is the only cabinet position that needs the green light from Parliament. Campaigning began for the June 1st local and parliamentary by-elections on Thursday. The results could serve as a barometer of success in the early days of the new government. Lee Kyung-eun explains further.
Positions up for grabs are 17 city mayors and provincial governors. And here at Gyeonggi-do Province that surrounds capital Seoul is the biggest battleground region where competition is really heating up between President Yoon's People Power Party and the main opposition, Democratic Party. Running for the Gyeonggi-do provincial governor from the ruling PPP side is Yoon's former spokesperson Kim Eun-hye. Kim launched her campaign at the very place where Yoon held his rally.
Only with the help of the central government can local issues be solved. It's why the province needs a ruling party candidate.
On the DP side is Kim Dong-yeon, former campaign merger partner of Yoon's main election rival Lee Jae-myung, who previously served as Gyeonggi-do provincial governor himself.
We must pick the right person who can counter the Yoon government and its absolute power.
Recent polls show the two running neck and neck with any gap falling within the margin of error. Incheon, Chungcheongnam-do, and Daejeon are other key swing regions where major parliamentary by-elections are also taking place. Both the PPP and the DP are targeting these areas to gain the majority of the 17 positions. The PPP's goal is to win at least 2 of them, expecting safe victories in the conservative strongholds as well as in Seoul, whereas Oh Se-hoon seemingly in favor to keep his post against DP former chair Song Young-gil.
It's a competition between a well-prepared Seoul expert versus the former interim mayor who was a failure.
With an increasing need lately to keep the government accountable, a candidate like myself should be part of the cabinet to do so, right?
With Seoul being ruled out, the DP is trying to win at least 3 swing regions in addition to its liberal strongholds, Jeju and Sejong. With the government controlled by the PPP and parliament by the DP, eyes are on how the regional powers will shape the nation's political dynamics. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
Well, for the by-elections, there are 7 vacancies to be filled in the National Assembly. Running for the post are big-name politicians, including former presidential candidates. Kim Do-yeon has the full story.
Along with the local elections, by-election campaigning has officially kicked off too, with 7 parliamentary seats up for grabs. This is yet another scene with big-name politicians like Han Duck-soo of People Power Party, former chair of Yoon's Transition Committee, as well as a presidential candidate looking to fill the vacancy caused by Kim Eun-hye's run in the Gyeonggi-do Province's gubernatorial race.
As the chairman of the Presidential Transition Committee, I oversaw the whole country's political tasks and also built up a rapport with important figures in the government. Also, this would make me a 3-term lawmaker.
The constituency is called Bundang-A in Gyeonggi-do Province, and it's known to house many South Korea's IT firms, including An's own company, Anlab. In this race from the Democratic Party of Korea is Kim Byung-kwan, also a former IT giant who used to be the lawmaker for the district from 2016 to 2020, the only time in the last 30 years that the district had a liberal parliamentary member.
I think it's already been 17 or 18 years. This area is like my second hometown because I raised my kids here and had my family life here. Also, I have my company here as well.
In the meantime, another big-name nomination is for a district in Incheon. Former DP presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung is officially back on the campaign trail, having lost the presidential race in March by the smallest margin on record, and now looking for a seat in the National Assembly. The seat has become vacant following Song Young-gil's run to become mayor of Seoul. As Lee leads the DP's committee for the local election, he's not just campaigning for himself, but to lead the party's overall victory in the local elections.
There's been enough punishment, so for the sake of this country's future, as well as the livelihoods of the people, please give my colleagues and me a chance.
His rival from the PPP is a politician that's been in the area for much longer. He criticized Lee for having no ties to the area and that he's only looking to use the district for his own political gain.
For the past 25 years, I've lived in Gyeonggi-do district, and I've been thinking about the current issues, and also felt the heartaches as the district was going down the wrong path.
The public waits to see whether the strategic nomination from the two parties will work in their favors. As for the other 5 vacancies, 3 of them come from PPP and 2 come from DP, and whether this will work in favor of one of the parties is still unclear. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, an explosion at an oil refinery in the southeast city of Ulsan has left 9 injured and 1 dead. S Oil Corporation's refinery, the 3rd largest in the country, is still on fire following the explosion on Thursday evening. Authorities have called in support from nearby fire stations while mobilizing nearly 60 fire trucks to put out the fire. They said the explosion appears to have occurred during the testing of the facility's alkylation processing equipment. Deputy Prime Minister Chu Kyung-ho urged the safety of the firefighters while asking authorities to examine any possible danger to nearby residents.
It's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into key issues in the spotlight right now. South Korea's film industry's Q1 sales jumped 52% on year, but it still saw cinema chains in the red in the same quarter. However, with more easing of restrictions, many moviegoers are now flocking to theaters.
That's right. So what movies should we look out for with the weekend upon us? Well, we connect with Piers Conran, a Seoul-based film critic. Thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. How are you?
Good, good. So before we ask you for some, recommendations, how much longer will it be until Korean production companies start releasing more films? Because it does look like there's still a limited number of domestic films currently being screened.
That's true. The distributors, the local distributors, have certainly been cautious throughout the pandemic, and that remains the case today. The summer, of course, is normally the busiest time for theaters. You normally have a lot of films competing for that really hot real estate at the box office. But this year, as the last few years, there haven't been too many films programmed as yet. We have a handful. We have a new film out now, which I'm looking forward to talking to you guys about. There are a few films scheduled next month, some of them in conjunction with the Cannes Film Festival, so they're platforming at the Cannes Film Festival this week and next, and then we'll hope to use that buzz to help them with their releases in Korea next month. And there are a handful of releases later in the summer, and that's kind of similar to what we've seen in the last few years, where we had, for instance, in 2020, the first summer of the pandemic, there were really only 2 major films that were released in summer. Those were Peninsula, the Train to Busan sequel, and Deliver Us from Evil, the hit action noir with Hwang Jung-min and now Lee Jung-jae, now the global star of Squid Game. And last summer we had Ri Sung-wan's Escape from Mogadishu and the disaster film Sinkhole. And those films, all had some audiences, but those were, of course, very limited compared to what we would normally expect. And so distributors have been in kind of perpetual wait-and-see mode and hoping for things to change. And now it seems like things are about to change. I think we're going to see the calendars filling up significantly over the next few weeks.
Well, I know that the new Doctor Strange movie is dominating box offices here right now, but are there any Korean films that stand out for you?
Absolutely. So yes, Doctor Strange has been was very successful in its first week in Korea, completely to be expected. Marvel has been so successful in Korea and of course around the world. And the question for people was, can Korean films compete? Marvel does well, but can anything else work in the marketplace? And now the answer is clearly a resounding yes, because the new film, The Roundup, that is a sequel to the 2017 film The Outlaws with Ha Dong-suk, also known as Don Lee, the star of also Marvel, the Eternals. This film has been very successful. It opened at the box office on Wednesday. It was clearly number one. It was the best debut of a Korean film during the pandemic, and it's getting great notices. Now, of course, there are a lot of the films coming out next month are very interesting. I mentioned about the Cannes Film Festival. So two of the films coming out next month are premiering at Cannes in competition, and these are both very, very exciting films. One of them is called Broker, which is actually by a Japanese filmmaker called Hirokazu Koreeda, who made Shoplifters, won the Palme d'Or at Cannes several years ago. This is his Korean film debut. It stars Song Kang-ho. It stars Lee Ji-eun, of course, better known by her K-pop moniker IU. It stars Kang Dong-won and Bae Juna and lots of other people. So it's a very exciting drama coming out. And then, of course, Park Chan-wook, the great artist, is coming back to theaters with Decision to Leave, which is kind of like a romantic thriller starring Park Hae-il and Chinese star Tang Wei. There's also another sequel, The Witch 2, or The Witch Part 2, the other one, which is a sequel to Park Hoon-jung's film with Kim Dan-mi from a few years ago. So that's another film that people are very excited about. And then this summer, the films that we already know about are Hansan, which is sort of a prequel to Roaring Currents, still the most successful Korean film of all time, all stars Park Hae-il, and then Alienoid, which is the Choi Dong-hoon film. This is the director of Thieves and Assassination. This is part one of a two-part kind of a sci-fi fantasy blockbuster that we're all very excited about. So I'm excited about all these films. I think viewers are, and soon the calendar will hopefully fill up a lot more exciting Korean films that have been held back for the last few years.
I mean, it's certainly a very long list, but like you said, I mean, the one movie that I really am looking forward to watching is 범죄 도시 2, which again, the English title being The Roundup. The first movie, obviously one of the best movies that I've watched in my recent memory, a smash hit certainly here in the country. But what are some of the critics like yourself saying about the sequel here? I mean, is this a must-see movie?
Unfortunately, I have yet to see it. I just came back from a trip, so I'm really looking forward to getting out and going to see it this weekend. But everything I've heard about it has been great. The buzz was pretty strong while it was being made. I've spoken to people the last few months from foreign festivals and foreign sales agents who are buying it for international territories, who were really excited about it, like this. And now critics have seen it here and viewers have watched it, and the scores are very, very high. So it seems like it's really recaptured the charm of the original. The first film, it relies a lot on Ha Dong-suk, and known as Don Lee, his kind of natural charisma, and it's a wonderful, wonderful showcase for him as the burly detective who really speaks with his fists, and so it's an action comedy. It's very very crunchy and gritty and fun, and this new one seems to be the same thing. And there's a lot of great notices for the new villain. In the first film, the villain was Yoon Ye-sang, who played a really vicious Chinese Korean gangster, and he was very popular. And now Son Seok-woo is playing a new villain, first of all based in Vietnam. The Ma Dong-seok's character is going to Vietnam to extradite the suspect. He runs into this new villain and they chase him back to Korea. Son Seok-woo, of course, is a wonderful actor who's also getting huge notices for the drama he's starring in right now called My Liberation Notes, which is a wonderful show if you like K-dramas. And so he's having a very big moment. And so yeah, people love it. I'm super excited to see it, and I think it's going to do huge numbers. It's already at 1 million viewers in 2 days, which is by far the best start we've seen for a Korean film during the pandemic.
Well, that is a lot to look forward to this year. If we're already almost halfway through 2022, if you can believe it, but it looks like there's a lot of exciting movies that we can check out in person in theatres in South Korea. Thank you so much for your insights this morning. Looking forward to watching some of these movies that you recommended.
My pleasure.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Sri Lanka has defaulted on its debt for the first time as the country struggles with its worst financial crisis in over 70 years. This comes after a 30-day grace period to pay $78 million of unpaid debt interest expired Wednesday. The country's central bank governor said Thursday that Asia's oldest democracy was now in a, quote, preemptive default. Last month, the island country announced it would stop international debt repayments to conserve dwindling foreign currency reserves. Plagued by an economic crisis triggered by the pandemic and Ukraine war, Sri Lanka has also witnessed a 40% inflation rate surge, alongside food, fuel, and medicine shortages. In Mexico, a bus accident on a highway in the western state of Jalisco has left 14 dead and about 20 injured, according to state emergency services on Wednesday. A statement made by the state's Civil Protection Agency on Twitter said they suspect that the bus brakes failed while it was carrying berry producer workers, ultimately causing it to crash into a highway wall. The injured have since been transferred to medical facilities and are receiving medical attention. Meanwhile, in Israel, authorities put an early end to a religious bonfire festival on Thursday. The move was made after dozens of ultra-Orthodox Jews attempted to cross police lines and barricades put in place to stop a repeat of a deadly crush in 2021, which killed 45 people. Since Israel's worst civilian disaster, authorities have limited the number of people allowed to enter the Holy Meron tomb at once and mandated that they need to arrive by authorized buses. Footage on social media shows pilgrims knocking down safety barricades and confronting police, whilst others threw water bottles. Organizers have said that bus services were shut down in the afternoon, hours before the festival's end. In Jordan, King Abdullah II has placed his half-brother under house arrest. Following a strongly worded public letter published on Thursday, the king said that he made the move due to Prince Hamza's, quote, erratic behavior and aspirations. This means that although Hamza will be provided with daily necessities, he'll no longer be afforded the same luxuries he once enjoyed. It marks the latest development in an ongoing palace feud that saw the prince placed under a form of detention in 2021. Originally, King Abdullah had appointed Hamza crown prince upon his succession, but later stripped that title, installing his own son as prince instead, in accordance with the country's constitution. Football's governing body FIFA announced on Thursday that female referees will officiate matches at the Men's World Cup for the first time in Qatar this year. Taking place from November 21st to December 18th, football's biggest sporting event will see 3 female referees and assistant referees oversee matches. Hailing from countries around the world, these 6 officials will join the 36-strong referee team and 69 assistant referees selected for the tournament. According to the FIFA Referees Committee chairman, the selection criteria used was quality first, with the process having started several years ago. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good morning. Early summer warmth continues in the afternoon, temperatures hovering a couple of degrees higher than season norms. There will be a fair amount of cloud cover across Korea for most of the day today. North of central regions in Jeju could see some light rain, while passing rain is in the forecast for Gyeonggi-do Provinces and surrounding regions, along with thunder and lightning. Morning temperatures are similar to slightly higher than the same time yesterday at 16 degrees Celsius here in the capital. Breathable air nationwide today. And it's going to be another hot day in South, Gyeonggi-do topping out at 30 degrees, Daegu at 28 degrees. Meanwhile, dry air advisory remains in place on the east coast and southern parts of the country. It's going to be a weekend filled with lots of sunshine and warmth. In fact, this Saturday's Soman, already the second summer season term, then things will get a bit hotter next week. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that wraps up our newscast for this morning, but we'll be back next week for our Monday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thanks for joining us, and do stick around for more updates throughout the day. Have a great rest of your day and weekend wherever you are. Goodbye.